Free agency. It can often make or break your favorite Overwatch team. Be it during the offseason or even mid-season, some teams find that life-changing pickup that transforms them into a completely different beast. It can always be a gamble going away from what you know, releasing a certain player, getting a new one into the mix. But what happens when it works in your favor? Now that we have a long history in front of us, I think it's time we talk about it. Here are my top 10 free agency signings in Overwatch League history as of 2023. What I'm going off is pretty simple. We're going to look at players who got picked up by a team and made a huge difference either in the short or long term. Doesn't really matter. And it can be during the season itself or in the off season. Either's fine. Oh, and just to make this a bit less confusing, I'm not going to count any rookies from season 2 and onward, as we probably could make a video devoted to just them at some point in the future. I also won't be counting any person that was picked up at the beginning of the inaugural season, because literally everybody was starting from zero back then, so it seems a little weird. But there is a chance I may throw in somebody who got picked up at mid-season during this time, so keep an eye out. And of course, no trades or transfers either. Got it? Alright, cool. Starting us off at number 10 is a guy who needs absolutely no introduction. It's gonna be DECAY as a mid-season pickup for the Washington Justice in 2020. As we all know, DECAY at this time had a troubled past. He was on 2 teams in less than a year and was part of some crazy drama on Dallas. But the Justice desperately needed some sort of star coming into the playoffs. So, naturally, they took a risk. They gave him a deal for the rest of the season and put all of their faith in him. And, well, he returned the favor. Between the right meta and his team putting their resources into him, DECAY became that guy. He flexed onto that tank role during the 2020 playoff run and played one of the most elite Zaryas of all time. He delivered with a lot of high damage output matches in the highest level of success the Justice have ever seen in their franchise. Not to mention that he helped the Justice go on one of the greatest Cinderella runs in League history. A 5-map bout with the Shock, 5 wins overall if you include the play-ins, and a top 3 finish in the North American bracket. And that's pretty insane considering that the Justice were nothing before they got him. And it's all because the Justice put their trust into him that this was able to happen. You can say what you want in terms of the lack of success the team found with him later on, but that 2020 run is special and definitely did put them on the map, so I believe that it's worth giving DECAY the number 10 spot in this instance. As for the number 9 spot, I'm rolling with another mid-season pickup. This time I'm going with TWILIGHT. While his impact maybe wasn't as great as DECAY's presence, let's say, he did make the Shock more competitive in terms of league standards by a long shot. Aside from being another superstar in their ranks, he rounded out that support rotation in the most perfect way possible. His comfort using Ana put a lot less pressure on Violet, as the Shock went from just, good or solid on dive to one of the most elite and scary teams in the league thanks to TWILIGHT, SMURF, and Striker all lining up next to each other. TWILIGHT may not have been that huge during the playoffs, let's say, but he was a big part of why the Shock demonstrated regular season dominance with ease to an easier path to get that 2020 title. And there's 2 main reasons why that was kind of the case. One is the Ana, like I mentioned earlier, but also the versatility. By pairing him up with Violet, the Shock had quite possibly the most deadly lineup and most dominant composition in Overwatch League history. I'm of course talking about that unbreakable double shield with BAP, Zen, Tracer, then either the Widowmaker or Ashe. The Shock were so ridiculously stacked on this composition that you would literally have to assemble an all-star team to even attempt to match them. Anytime they played it, they were just curb-stopping people left and right. It didn't have to be flashy or anything for TWILIGHT. He didn't win anything super significant like a Roll Star, an MVP, anything like that. But his sheer presence was more than enough to help the Shock get their 2nd championship in a row and demonstrate some of the most brilliant, polished play we have ever seen. At number 8, we've got yet another guy often associated with the Shock. It's gonna be SMURF, getting picked up by the Seoul Dynasty during the previous offseason. It's a little unfortunate in terms of the team's shortcomings and their falling out this offseason, but for what it's worth, SMURF for all intents and purposes was the missing link between Seoul being solid and the best in APAC. A reliable tank was the thing that they really needed for about 2 or so years, and the final results show it. But by adding SMURF into the mix, Seoul were able to win their first ever tournament after 5 years of searching for one, and arguably had their most dominant regular season in franchise history. Between SMURF and Profit's consistency, the Dynasty just felt like a true threat that could carry and dominate and had a chance to go all the way if things went in their favor. And I'm sorry to say, up until SMURF joined last year, it felt like it had been years since anybody had truly taken this team seriously. SMURF coming here gave Seoul fans something they've been waiting for 5 years. And as a bonus, this was arguably SMURF's best year as a pro. It's up for debate, but that's my opinion. He got a Roll Star, an MVP nomination, and was arguably a top 2 tank in the league thanks to his consistency and flexibility. And keep in mind that he was the only tank player on the roster, so all responsibility was directly on him. The SMURF pickup managed to be even more impactful than we thought it would, and considering the type of player that SMURF is, that's pretty ridiculous. Number 7. BIRDRING. Out of every player on this entire list, BIRDRING is easily the biggest high-risk, high-reward pickup. Nobody really knew if BIRDRING could ever get back to a Season 1 form, especially on an English-speaking roster and after everything that happened during the 2019 season. Expectations naturally were not that high. The thought was that maybe he'd come in, be okay, then probably retire after a year. But that couldn't be any further from the truth, because BIRDRING played on a level that transcended even his prime Spitfire days. He became a franchise cornerstone and carry for a majority of 2020. He was a legitimate superstar through and through, and while more so in Season 3, I would say that he was still a superstar level player in Season 4 as well, which did play a pretty pivotal role in helping the Gladiators capture their Countdown Cup title. BIRDRING dominated in ways that are criminally underlooked when considering just how risky of a pickup he was at the time. Given BIRDRING's history, the wrist injury that happened, as well as just the falling out in Season 2 with London, it's kind of wild to see just how much value the Gladiators got out of a guy they probably weren't expecting all that much from. Moving on to number 6, we're going to stay with the LA Gladiators, and this time it's going to be Shu. Shu entered free agency after 2 years on the charge, showing a lot of promise as one of the better flex supports in the Overwatch League. There is so much upside to this guy, and it still felt like his ceiling had yet to be reached. So when the Glad shelled out a ton of money for him, as well as an excellent supporting cast, Shu had a chance to take his game to the next level. And within just a couple of months, that is exactly what he did. Through his time on the Glads, he totally broke through by elevating himself to the best flex support in the game at one point, and arguably top 2 in his second year. He built a name for himself as one of the most explosive flex supports in this league's history, and one of the greatest Baptiste players in general. Add in 2 Roll Stars and 2 MVP nominations, and he's pretty much been the best support in Overwatch for 2 years running. And that's just what he accomplished individually. Think about how huge he was in all 3 of the Glad's tournament titles. He was there constantly as a key starter through it all, with some iconic plays spread throughout. The memories he's formed and the amount that he's done for this franchise makes him one of the most successful free agency signings in OWL history without a doubt. Oh, and guess what? We have one more Gladiators player to go over, because at number 5, I'm going with FUNNYASTRO. What I like about Astro is that he's a double whammy. He was a good free agent pickup for not one team, but 2. Some people forget that he actually wasn't a rookie in 2020. He initially started as a backup 2-way player on the Atlanta Reign in 2019, before finally getting his chance to spread his wings and fly during 2020. And it was during this free agency period that Philly scooped him up to become one half of one of the most transcendent backlines in league history. What Astro did in his first year as a starter was simply remarkable. His aggressive and yet disciplined style of play gave the Fusion really good intangibles, as well as leadership and support for their front line. He was everything the Fusion could have ever asked for, and even more. I know the Fusion didn't win anything with him, but they were always consistent and relevant, which is something that wasn't always the case for them in the past. It's the consistency that really stands out. And what's crazy is that he's only done much of the same since joining the Gladiators last year. He was a bit more of a rotational piece, but when it came down to those control maps and Lucio-centric metas, he showed up time after time after time. He played an absolutely critical role, especially in that Glad's kickoff clash title with some very memorable moments. FUNNYASTRO has proven to be one of the most valuable main supports in the game's lifetime, and 2 teams managed to get that kind of production out of him as an off-season pickup. He's got double the proven feats with multiple high-level winning seasons, and had he won a grand finals at some point, he'd likely be even higher on this list. Anyway, as we move on to number 4, I'm going with MOTH to the Shock in mid-2018. In my opinion, this is one of the greatest high-level investments we've ever seen. MOTH was very much available at the start of 2018. People need to remember that. He was old enough. Nobody wanted him. He did his thing on Toronto Esports, but nobody seemed to care. But then came the Shock, who desperately, I mean desperately, needed an upgrade at main support. For those who remember Dak, well, you know, there's no need to go any more into detail. The Shock just needed somebody more stable, both to end the season and for years to come. And I'm not exactly sure if they saw MOTH as that guy during the time, but he certainly turned into him. And you might argue they actually got more than they bargained for. He was more than just a replacement and somebody to maybe help them improve slightly. MOTH is arguably one of the greatest main supports and in-game leaders in Overwatch history. He did so much of that dirty work behind the scenes, people don't even realize, and it's ultimately a big thing that helped the Shock obtain multiple championships and tournament titles. He was just okay back in 2018, but then the quick improvement came into effect, and that's ultimately the thing that gave the Shock that stable environment they needed to win it all. His play was always consistent, he was always really smart, and he was team-first oriented, and yet he was never afraid to go big when his team needed a hero. He never faltered during those 3 years on San Francisco. I mean, it's kind of insane when looking at it from the big picture. He always managed to keep up, and he always managed to keep all of those big-name personalities in check and focused while providing excellent shot calling. He was the balance for your Supers and Violets of the world. He really was the glue that held San Francisco together, and what happened after he left makes it pretty apparent. He was always reliable, even when he was the only English speaker in the starting lineup. The Shock got one of their most important leaders from a mid-season desperation pickup. Who would have thought? And entering our top 3, we're going to start with Fielder. Some people forget that Dallas actually did not trade for him back in 2021. He was simply let go by Paris, and Dallas pounced on the opportunity. And it's a good thing they did, because what Fielder did in 2 years for the Fuel is some of the most unbelievable flex support play we've ever witnessed. Fielder was always a superstar for that franchise, who constantly found himself on the top of the leaderboard statistically. One might argue that Fielder was the backbone behind all of Dallas's success. Like MOTH, he is a really great team-first drive that keeps him going and really helps people like Hanbin, Fearless, and Sparkle thrive. And whenever the lights were at their brightest, you knew that this guy was going to show up and do something impressive. Think about how he played in the 2021 May Melee run, as well as the Grand Finals last year. Every big tournament usually saw some massive plays out of him, be it on Ana, Brig, Bap, Moira, Zen, Kiriko. He did a little of everything. You especially have to be impressed with his ability to pick up a new hero in a high-pressure environment and win a Grand Finals while arguably being the best in the league on her. In my opinion, Dallas signed the greatest peer support in the league's history. His healing output was always off the charts, his death count at a minimum, the intangibles through the roof, and it's exactly what Dallas needed. You have all these aggro, flashy players, so it's a must to have a guy who can adapt and keep up and give you proper balance. He was an MVP/role star level player in both years on Dallas, and definitely a top 3 or better flex support throughout. Dallas picking up Fielder was so huge, and I doubt that they'd win it all without him. And at number 2, I'm going with Void. Is it a stretch to call Void to Shanghai the greatest deal in off-season history? I'd say no. When the Glads let him go at the end of 2019, it was so clear that Void was a high potential option that just about everybody would love to get their hands on. And yet, some people still refuse to respect him. I'm looking at you, Reinforce. I remember. All Void really needed was the right support around him in a fully Korean environment perhaps, and he could be something special. We witnessed a lot of flashes throughout the years, both on Gangdu Panthera and the LA Gladiators, and with a legit contending team around him, Void was able to take his game to unimaginable heights. In all 3 seasons on the Shanghai Dragons, he was a superstar in this league without question. In back-to-back seasons, he was the best off-tank in the league arguably, a role star, an MVP level player, and in my opinion he gave us 2 of the greatest individual season performances at tank we've ever seen. The high damage, the minimal death count, his ability to always dominate and be in the right place at the right time, it was insane. How he managed to be literally everywhere at once is peak off-tank play, and in 2020, you really could have made the case that he was the MVP of the league. There's very few seasons that compare to how high Void was able to rise the bar in both 2020 and 2021. Despite playing with 3 different tank partners during this time, Void constantly stayed ahead of every rival in front of him while establishing himself as one of the greatest off-tanks of all time on the Shanghai Dragons. He built an all-time great legacy, both individually and as a team. What he gave to this franchise is simply unforgettable. It's one of the greatest careers we have ever seen, and it was all possible because the Dragons decided to offer him a deal. When you are obviously the best like that for so long, you're without question one of the greatest free agency pickups ever. But unfortunately for Void, one guy tops him in my eyes, because at number 1, I have Choi Yobin. Thanks to his clutch feats throughout the years, he is in my eyes the GOAT off-tank. He may not have the same longevity or flexibility or the same insane stats as Void or even Hanbin, but what he does have is a lot of the most clutch feats from a tank player of all time. The young Choi was looking for a team throughout all of 2018 while constantly proving himself in Contenders Korea for X6 Gaming. But even after his promotion happened to the Shock, him and Nevix were splitting playtime a lot, and there was no true way of telling what their future would be at this position, and that's kind of what makes this pickup so insane. Things started off rather uncertain, and it didn't feel like there were any guarantees for Choi, but that is until he decided to elevate his play to heights literally never seen before. It started off with a pretty innovative diva during the GOATS era, but then it quickly turned into a lot more when Choi decided to go on a ridiculous clutch streak. From the Stage 1 finals and onward in 2019, Choi transformed into the most high-performing player in high-stakes environments in league history for 2 years running. On the surface, you have all of the obvious stuff. He helped the Shock win 2 titles, one of which where he became the league's best Sigma seemingly overnight and winning Finals MVP. No other player on this list using the criteria I'm doing in this video won a Finals MVP. But then he had his fingerprints all over the 2020 finals as well, in pretty similar fashion, just more well established. But it goes way beyond those championships, awards, and improvement. It's what he did on a game-to-game basis that really stands out during those major matches. There's countless matches, win or loss, where it was Choi keeping the Shock in those pivotal matches. You can pretty much recall a moment from every finals match the Shock have ever played. Stage 1 and 2, 2019 for his Diva, Stage 3, 2019 for his Roadhog, the 2019 Finals, the 2020 Finals, the 2021 NA Countdown Cup qualifiers, and others. Every single time, without fail, when the Shock needed some kind of spark to keep them alive or take them over the top, Choi delivered. Win or loss, you need that kind of franchise cornerstone, and that's what Choi provided. Just an absolute legend that 11 other franchises had a chance to get their hands on back in spring 2018. Choi literally lived for the spotlight, which is something that a lot of people crumble under, which just makes this pickup even more insane. The Shock won the lottery with this one. It wasn't always certain what his role was going to be, which is kind of what makes this such a legendary signing. He definitely wasn't as name brand as like Void or even Hanbin when first joining the league. So the fact that they got 2 championships largely thanks to his help in one of the greatest careers of all time is absolutely stunning, and it's ultimately what lands Choi as the #1 spot on this list. And on that note, those are my greatest free agency signings ever from 1 to 10. What are your thoughts on this list? Did I forget somebody? Would you have changed the order? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this content and you want more videos like it in the future, do me a favor and give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I would really appreciate it a lot. This has been ATP, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Peace.